Natia pleaded with her eyes, but when Amma wouldn't even look her way, her calves began to shake. No, she blurted out. It was one thing for Amma to drag her out here for one day, but to make her quit school? Abu would be furious with them both. She tugged at her mother's shoulder, but Amma turned only long enough to give her a reprimanding glare. Don't spoil this, her eyes commanded. Natia loosed her grip and lowered her voice to barely a whisper so only Amma would hear. Please, Amma, I can't fall behind. Abu would never allow me to miss school. Why are you trying to make things worse for us? Amma brushed Natia away with an impatient hand and proceeded to negotiate with Fatima. Natia stood behind her in silence as she willed her mother to say no and walk away, but it was no use. Amma's protests were lame, and Shanaz was only half-hearted in her attempts to convince Fatima to raise the pay. In the end, Amma accepted the deal. To make matters worse, an advance was out of the question, and there would be no payment until the month's end. When the deal was sealed, Natia picked up Mateen and followed Amma and Shanaz to the gate. With her eyes downcast and her body limp with exhaustion, Natia reluctantly ignored Isha's plaintive cries to be carried too. What had Shanaz gotten them into? Later, they sat in the shade of a neem tree and ate the meal straight out of the plastic bag. The break was painfully short, and they moved on to the next house, where Natia again helped her mother clean, this time moving faster since their hunger was sated and the house was smaller. When they reached the third house, the sun had dipped farther toward the horizon, and long shadows fell on the ground. Black paint peeled from the sheet metal gate, and there were cracks in the concrete driveway. Shanaz rang the buzzer, and a boy about Isha's age swung open the gate. Look who's here! The boy pranced around on bare feet. You're late! He ushered them inside, bolted the gate, and then ran back toward the house, hollering, Baji, Seema Baji, the Masis are here. With Mateen on her hip, Isha holding on to her dupatta, Natia trudged behind her mother up to the house. The bougainvillea grew wildly over the low wall, and the magenta-colored flowers withered and dry. Patches of dry earth were visible between the thatches of brown grass, and a large coconut tree offered the only shade. The wrought iron grills that covered the windows were rusted a deep bronze. Natia stood with Mateen asleep against her as she listened to the new Memsahib go over their duties. The pay was 200 less than the other two houses, but the work was much lighter. She breathed a sigh of relief when Seema said the house needed only sweeping and mopping since the day was almost done. Natia laid Mateen on the grass in the shade of the palm tree and ordered Isha to keep an eye on him. Isha collapsed beside her brother and closed her eyes. A wave of pity flushed through Natia at the sight of her sister's exhaustion, but she turned away before the tears could spring. The boy who had opened the gate watched them, his head cocked to one side, his brows furrowed together. She's not going to help? Of course not. Natia removed her dupatta from her shoulders and tied it tightly at her hip. She's only 10 years old. 10? The boy's mouth twisted in a quizzical expression. So I must be 10, right? Natia looked at the boy. He was barely taller than Isha. His hair was jet black, but coarse from lack of washing. He wore a common kurta and pajama, pale blue, too big. His eyes were large, and he flashed a toothy grin and wiggled his eyebrows at her. Don't you know your own age? She asked. He shrugged. I'd say you're 10. Is the Mem Sahib, Seema Baji, your mother? The boy grabbed his belly, doubling over in laughter. Why is that so funny? Natia snapped. Baji is Baji. My mother lives near the railway station. I live here with Baji and help her take care of the house. I can't do everything. That's why she told Shanaz Baji to bring your Amma. Natia tried to imagine this reed-thin boy doing all the cleaning. What do you do? I open the gate, take out the trash, run to the market, tend to the garden, make tea, rub Baji's feet. Whatever she wants, I can do it. He puffed out his chest and thumped it. Shirzad can do anything. Shirzad, eh? I'm Natia. She waved a hand behind her. Mateen and Isha, my brother and sister. So you live here? He pointed to a small room built into the wall by the gate. See over there? That's mine. I guard the house from thieves and killers every night. Natia snorted. You're so small, they'd probably mistake you for a mouse. Shirzad giggled and punched the air with his fist. A killer mouse, a weasel, even the cobras can't catch me. He bounced around and pretended to throw punches at her. Natia, Shanaz's shrill voice erupted from behind the front window. The screen was gray with dust, and her face was barely visible. Get in here and help your mother. Shirzad, leave her alone. They didn't come here to entertain you. Shirzad stuck out his tongue at the sooty window and mimicked Shanaz. He giggled again when she hollered at him. Go on, he said, still smiling as he walked away. I have to finish hanging the laundry. In less than an hour, Natia and her mother finished up and headed home. The Baji didn't offer any food, and Ahmad didn't ask. They were simply grateful that the Mem Sahib only needed the floor cleaned. When they got home, they found Abu lying on the mattress watching television. He started to get up, then fell back against the cushions. Where have you been? Isha went to her father and collapsed on his chest. Amma took us with her. She cleaned houses all day long, and I had to take care of Mateen. Natia splashed water on her face. She listened to her parents, waiting for Abu's fury. Cleaning houses was something only the poor did. It was work that only the transient people would agree to do, the ones who left their villages up north to find some semblance of prosperity in the big city. Cleaning houses was something you did when no one else would hire you. Abu would never tolerate the shame of his family's lowering themselves to this. He would make sure she stayed in school. But Abu asked Amma in a mild voice, How much are they paying you? Natsia's hand slowed as she wiped the water from her face with her sweaty dupatta. It will come, she thought. Abu's indignation will come and rescue me. Amma put a pot of water on the stove for tea. 2 houses are 800 rupees apiece, and 1 house is paying 600. She moved out of the kitchen, which was nothing more than a corner of the small house, with no wall to muffle the sounds of clattering pans and running water. There was a moment of silence. 2,200 rupees? Abu asked, shaking his head in disbelief. That's what I make at the construction site. Amma made a small sound when she bent to sit on the floor on the other side of the room, far from her husband. She leaned against the wall and squeezed her eyes shut for a moment as she massaged her knees. Slowly, she opened them and stared vacantly at the TV screen. Natia stayed in the kitchen waiting for the water to boil. Why wasn't Abu upset? Yes, it was a lot of money. Well, not a whole lot, but still. It was from cleaning rich people's toilets. Mateen waddled up with his hands outstretched and wrapped himself around Natia's legs, begging to be lifted. She smoothed his hair and clucked at him, trying to silence him so she could hear her father. Nasim, you know I'll find work when I get better. His voice was cheery. Can you imagine? If only Bilal wasn't such a duffer. I bet he could make at least as much. And then we'd have almost 5,000 rupees a month. 5,000 rupees. Don't say that about my son, Amma snapped. You know he left to find work. Bilal is a boy with a degree. He'll find something and make me proud. Natia handed a stale piece of bread to Mateen. He grabbed the roti and wriggled away to sit on Abu's stomach, bouncing gleefully. Isha moved aside to rest her head in the crook of Abu's arm. So that's it? Natia thought. Bilal's disappearance weighed so heavily on Abu's mind that he wasn't grasping what Amma was saying. Maybe he would realize the horror of it when he understood that Amma intended to pull her out of school. She made the chai and offered the tray of cups to her father first. He slid Mateen off his stomach and nudged Isha away before taking the good teacup. He looked at Natia. Beta, you helped your mother? Although she was bent over with the tray outstretched, Natia ignored the dull pain in her back while her father's eyes held hers. He was finally asking the right questions. She nodded eagerly. Good girl. Cleaning houses is hard work. Amma cannot do it alone. She needs you. Natia blinked at her father. Didn't he realize what that meant? But he seemed oblivious to her shock and went on stirring sugar into his chai. Bilal should be the one coming home telling me he found work. He settled back against the pillow and shook his head. Only God knows where that lazy boy could be. She wondered where Bilal could have gone. He disappeared for days on ends with his friends, but he'd never been gone this long before. She offered the tray to her mother, who refused to meet her gaze. Without a word, Natia handed Amma the cracked cup, then returned to the kitchen to make dinner. She filled a pan of orange lentils with water and skimmed away the gritty foam with her fingers. After putting the lentils on the stove to boil, she put on another pot of water for the rice. As she waited for the second pot to boil, she sifted through the rice and picked out tiny stones, discarding them in the sink. Amma's voice carried over the drama on PTV, the national channel. Natia will have to leave school. Natia's hands stilled. Her father clicked his tongue. What about Isha and Mateen? Isha can still take the bus to school if Mateen stays home with you. How would I care for him? It hurts me to move around. Amma was silent. Natsia turned the faucet on and rinsed the rice. Abu shifted his weight on the foam mattress and groaned. You'll have to take them with you. Isha can go to school later. Natsia will be getting married soon anyway, so it doesn't matter. Let her husband send her to school if he wants. It doesn't matter? If her husband wants? The second pot began to boil, and Natsia let the grains of rice fall in. But they fell too quickly, and boiling water splattered onto her hands, scalding her. Ouch! She slammed the pan on the counter. What is wrong? Her father called out. Tell him, she shouted to herself. Tell him everything's all wrong. Instead, she turned on the faucet and held her hand under the running water. Nothing, Abu. Nothing's wrong. How could she make a fuss about her own selfish needs when Abu was so overwhelmed by other, more pressing problems, like a leg that didn't work or a son who'd been missing for weeks? He needed her to be strong. That was what he was trying to tell her, and so she would be, whether she wanted to or not. That was it then. There would be no more discussion about school. She wondered what Malia and Sarah would say when she didn't show up tomorrow or the next day or the weeks after that. Would they still come to play with her? Or would she always come home too tired to see them? Would they even want to be her friends when they found out she was a Masi, a servant to the wealthy? She stuck out her tongue to lick away salty tears. Outside, the call to namaz sounded again. Would she ever stand in prayer with her class fellows? Would she ever hear the tales of Miss Haroon and her adventurous travels around the country? Would she ever go back to school again? Natsia was on her knees mopping the kitchen floor at the last house of the day. Her pace had improved as the days passed, and she was able to be home by late afternoon, leaving time for Amma to keep up with her sewing. It was already mid-September, and Amma was still working hard to build up the jeheh for her daughter's wedding. Natsia wiped the concrete floor with a dirty rag, occasionally dipping it in a bucket of murky soap water. Shirzad swung open the screen door. Where's Seema Baji? Natsia shrugged and kept working. Shirzad rattled the door. Could you just get her? I'm going to die if she doesn't feed me soon. Natsia's own stomach growled at the thought of food. She had learned quickly that the Bajis gave food on their own whims and were rarely considerate enough to ask if they were ever hungry. Just then, Seema lumbered into the kitchen, her hair mussed and her eyes heavy, as though she had just woken from a fitful nap. Shirzad immediately perked up. Baji, I've finished weeding the kayari. Can I have lunch now? Coming, she grumbled. She pulled his steel plate from the cabinet and filled it with day-old roti and soupy green lentils. She held it out, but Shirzad shook his head. Baji, please, do I look like a bird? Even a bird would eat this and still be hungry. Don't be insolent. She frowned and shoved the plate closer to Shirzad. Take it. He crossed his arms, locking his hands under his armpits. I've been cooking in the sun since morning to clean your garden, and this is all I get. He glanced at the stove and took a deep, exaggerated whiff. There's gosht salon over there. The fragrance from the beef curry is too strong to ignore. Baji, please. All you gave me for breakfast was chai and roti. I'm a growing boy. He stood on his tiptoes. I need meat. Natsia suppressed a smile and ran the wet rag over Shirzad's foot. He didn't move. Baji set the plate on the center island and placed her hands on her bulky hips. Lentils sloshed over the chipped marble top. What do you take me for? Your private cook? Suddenly, she grabbed Shirzad by the front of his shirt and cuffed him on the head. Shirzad brought his arms to his head. Stunned, Natsia shrank back against the cabinets, partly hidden from view by the center island. At that moment, the Sahib entered the kitchen, his cane slipping on the wet floor. What's going on here? Natsia stood up, yanking her dupatta from her waist and draping it over her hair. Sahib, be careful. The floor is wet. He stopped, taking in Shirzad's hunched stance. He glared at his wife. Seema, what is the matter with you? Why must you always hit the servants for no reason at all? Stay out of it, Rashid. The servants are my problem, not yours. Seema grabbed a rag and wiped up the green spill on the marble. She picked up the plate and thrust it at Shirzad, motioning for him to go outside. Shirzad took the plate gingerly and tried to slink out, but Rashid stopped him. Do you want more food? He asked Shirzad. Nahi, Sahib. Shirzad shook his head. Baji gave me plenty.